The land remembers everything. Every hoof print, every prayer, every drop of blood it drinks under a copper sky. Some say the desert forgets, but I've lived long enough to know the desert keeps secrets better than people do. The year was fading toward winter when the story began, though out here in Arizona, winter was just a softer kind of dust. The sun still burned, the wind still spoke in dry tongues, and the earth cracked like old skin. I remember that evening clear, the sky wide and bruised, the air thick with the smell of cattle and dying grass. Elias Turner rode home slow, his hat pulled low, his horse limping from the long road back from town. He was a big man once, the kind whose laugh could shake the rafters of a saloon, but now his shoulders slumped like the barn he'd built 20 years ago. The dust on his boots wasn't just from the trail, it was from the graves he carried inside. His wife, Mary, his boy, Jacob, gone to fever and drought. The ranch, Turner's hope, stood like a tired old ghost. Fences broken, troughs dry, cattle thin as shadows. Only the wind moved freely across that land. Old Hank waited on the porch, one hand on his hip, the other gripping a chipped mug of coffee. He'd been with Elias since they were both half the men they used to be. "Town ain't got no good news, I reckon?" Hank asked. Elias swung down from his horse, boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. "Bank wants what I don't have. Guess that's good news if you're the bank." The old man sighed through cracked lips. "She's dying, Elias. You can't fight drought with pride." Elias looked out at the horizon where his land met Apache country, the canyons red and endless, the same way they'd always been. "Ain't the drought that's killing her," he said quietly. "It's the memory." That night, he sat by the dying fire, the stars pale and far away. The coyotes sang their broken song, and he thought of Mary's voice, soft, full of laughter, how it used to fill the ranch like morning light. He hadn't heard laughter here in years, not since the world had turned dry and hard. He should have slept, but something in the air felt wrong. A whisper under the wind, a smell, not dust, not sagebrush smoke. He bolted upright, boots hitting the porch before thought caught up. The barn, his last good barn, was a torch in the dark. Flames clawed the sky like angry hands. "Damnation!" he roared, grabbing his rifle. Hank came stumbling behind him, coughing, shouting, but the fire was already alive, wild and hungry. Through the chaos, Elias saw movement, shadows on horseback, faces masked, glints of steel. Raiders, maybe drifters, maybe worse. He fired, the bullets slicing through night, and the shadows fled toward the canyon. He chased without thinking, through smoke, through pain, through the madness of losing one more thing he loved. But the desert has its own laws. A step too far, a sharp cry from his horse. Then blackness. When he opened his eyes, it was dawn. The fire had eaten most of what he owned. His body ached, his head rang like a church bell. The air was thick with the smell of burnt hay and sorrow. Something soft brushed his temple, cool, wet. A hand. Not Hank's, not rough or shaking, but steady. He tried to speak, but his throat was raw. Through the haze, he saw her. An Apache woman, young but weathered by sun and grief, kneeling beside him. Her dark hair was braided with tiny feathers, her eyes deep as canyon shadows. She pressed a damp cloth to his brow, her movements quiet, almost reverent. He wanted to push her away, to demand who she was, but his voice failed. She said nothing, only whispered to the wind in her language, words that sounded like prayer. He drifted again into half-sleep, hearing her hum, low and soft, like the earth itself was singing to him. When he woke next, she was gone, but his wound was bandaged with woven herbs and cloth. A small fire burned nearby, and beside it, a pouch made of deerskin. Inside, a carving, a small bird, its wings open. He sat up slowly, pain slicing through his ribs. The horizon stretched empty, the kind of silence that makes a man question what's real. Old Hank limped up behind him, ash on his hands, his voice a whisper. "You're lucky you ain't coyote meat, Elias. Found you out cold. Barn's gone, but the house still stands." Elias didn't answer. His eyes stayed on the edge of the canyon, the direction she'd gone. Someone helped me, he murmured finally. Hank frowned. Helped? Ain't no one out here but ghosts. Elias opened his hand, showing the carved bird. Then maybe a ghost left this. The old man spat. Apache sign, maybe. You best burn it. Ain't no good mixing with their kind. Elias closed his fingers around the carving. It felt warm, alive somehow. He didn't burn it. He tied it to his belt instead. For days after, he tried to work, though his ribs protested and his mind kept wandering. Every time he mended a fence or lifted a bucket, he thought of her face, calm, unreadable, but kind. He'd seen plenty of faces in his life. Liars, killers, women with soft hands and sharp eyes. But hers was different. There was no judgment there, only quiet. Each night, he'd sit by the ashes of the barn and stare at the canyon ridge, half expecting to see her again. On the fifth morning, he found the water troughs full. No rain had fallen, no footprints in the dirt. The next day, a fence that had been split by the fire was mended with fresh willow wood. Old Hank swore it was magic. Elias didn't believe in magic, but he started to believe in mercy. One evening, as the sun bled red into the horizon, he saw movement near the corral, a slender figure bending over a wounded colt, hands steady, movement sure. The colt was breathing hard, trapped in barbed wire. He stepped closer, slow. The figure turned, and there she was again. Her eyes met his, calm as still water. No fear, no guilt, only quiet strength. She said something in Apache. He couldn't understand, but the tone carried peace. He lowered his rifle. You came back. She didn't answer. She kept working until the colt was free, then rose, brushing dust from her hands. You saved him, he said, half to himself. She looked at him for a long time before speaking in broken English. No saving, just helping the land. Her voice was low, melodic, carrying that same strange warmth that had reached him through the smoke that night. Elias wanted to thank her, to ask her name, but she was already turning toward the canyon. He called out after her, Why'd you help me? She paused only once, her silhouette framed by the setting sun. Because you were burning, she said softly, and the fire would have spread. Then she walked away. He stood there long after she disappeared into the fading light, the colt's gentle breathing the only sound in the world. That night, Elias didn't sleep. He sat by the window, the carved bird resting in his palm. Somewhere out there, the woman who'd saved his life walked the same desert paths as ghosts and legends. He didn't know her story, but the land did. And for the first time in years, he felt something stir in his chest. Not hope, not yet, but something like the memory of it. The wind moved through the broken barn posts, whispering secrets he couldn't catch. He looked out toward the horizon, the line between his world and hers, and murmured to the empty dark, You saved me, whoever you are, but the world won't understand you here. The moon rose over Turner's hope, lighting the ashes of what had been, and the promise of what might still be. And somewhere beyond the ridge, under a sky full of ancient stars, the Apache girl walked on, unseen, unthanked, carrying a secret that would one day change everything. The days that followed were dry and strange, like the world was holding its breath. Elias Turner rose each morning before the sun, the way he always had, out of habit, not hope. He'd walk the fences, feed what cattle were left, and curse the silence that followed him like a shadow. Old Hank had gone to fetch supplies from town, leaving him alone with the land. He didn't mind the solitude. It was company that had hurt him most in life. But something had changed. Small things. Subtle. The gate that hung crooked after the fire now stood straight. The buckets he'd left cracked by the well were patched. Once he found a bundle of fresh sage tied to his porch rail, a soft scent against the bitterness of smoke. He knew what it meant. She was still out there. He told himself he didn't care, that he didn't need anyone's help, least of all from a woman his kind had been taught to fear. But pride is a thin blanket on cold nights. On the fifth dawn since the fire, the horse in the corral, his wife's old mare, began to whinny sharp and frantic. Elias stepped outside, rifle in hand. The horizon was washed gold, the air thick with dust. Then he saw her, the Apache woman, kneeling in the corral, hands pressed to the mare's flank. The horse was bleeding from a cut, deep but clean. The woman was muttering softly, sprinkling crushed leaves over the wound. The mare, wild even with Elias, stood still under her touch. Elias watched from a few paces away, torn between anger and awe. He finally spoke, voice low but firm. "You again." She didn't look up. "Your horse is hurt. I can see that. You should not leave Wire where she walks." Her tone wasn't sharp, just factual, like wind speaking truth to stone. Elias leaned a rifle against the post and knelt beside her. "You've been around here, haven't you?" She didn't deny it. "You needed help." He studied her, the worn buckskin dress, the way her hands moved, sure and steady. She looked too young to have eyes that tired. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, then said Naya. He repeated it softly, as if testing it on his tongue. Naya. It sounded like wind through tall grass. She rose, wiping her hands on her skirt. "I will go now." Elias stood too, blocking her path just slightly. "You could stay, just till the mare's better." Her gaze met his, unreadable. "Your people do not like mine." He half smiled without humor. "My people don't like much of anyone these days." For the first time, her lips curved faintly. Not quite a smile, but close enough to make the morning seem a little warmer. They worked in silence after that. Day by day, she lingered, tending the animals, fetching water, teaching him the quiet patience of her ways. Elias learned she could move through the land without stirring a single blade of grass. She could tell where the deer had passed by the way the wind shifted. Sometimes at dusk, she'd hum soft songs in her language, songs that felt older than the hills. He'd listen from a distance, pretending not to. He began to speak more, though his words came slow. He told her about Mary, his wife, how she died coughing in spring, when the desert bloomed red and cruel. How his boy had followed her 2 summers later. How the house still echoed with their voices when the wind got in through the cracks. Naya never pitted him. She only listened, eyes calm, like she was storing his pain somewhere safe. One evening, as the sky burned orange, she told him her story, her voice soft, her gaze on the horizon. Her people had lived north of the canyon until the soldiers came. Her father was a healer. Her mother wove blankets that told stories in color. When the raids began, many fled deeper into the desert. Some didn't make it. "I was a child then," she said. "The earth shook with gunfire. I remember my mother's hands pushing me into the rocks, telling me to stay silent." Elias didn't ask what happened next. He didn't have to. Some things the silence says loud enough. After that night, he saw her differently. Not as a stranger, not as an Apache, but as someone who understood loss the way he did. Not as a wound, but as a room you learn to live in. One morning, she found him sitting by the dry well, face buried in his hands. The bank had sent word. If he didn't pay soon, the ranch would be taken. "You should let it go," she said quietly. He looked up, eyes red. "This land's all I got left." She knelt beside him. "Then maybe it's time to give it back to the earth." Her words stung, but not out of cruelty. They were true in a way he didn't want to face. He took a long breath. "You don't understand. This ranch, it's my family." She pointed toward the horizon. "Your family's gone, Elias. The land will stay, but only if you let it breathe again." He didn't answer, just looked at her hands, small, strong, scarred from work. Hands that healed what others destroyed. Over the next weeks, they rebuilt what they could. He taught her to ride the mare, though she already knew how to move with the animal like a shadow. She showed him how to find water by tracing the flight of birds. Sometimes they'd work without speaking for hours, and somehow it felt like conversation. At night, they'd sit by the fire, the desert alive with crickets. She'd speak softly of her father's stories, of spirits that watched from the mountains, of rivers that carried memories. He'd listen and wonder if maybe his wife and boy were among those spirits now, watching him rebuild something that wasn't just wood and nails. Then came the day she smiled, truly smiled for the first time. They were fixing the corral fence when a dust devil rose nearby, spinning wild through the air. She laughed, light and sudden, and Elias froze, startled by the sound. It had been years since laughter had lived on that land. He felt something uncoil inside him, something that had been asleep too long. When she caught him staring, she turned away, cheeks flushed. "The wind is playing," she said softly. He grinned a little. "Ain't just the wind." That night, while the moon climbed high, he found himself whispering her name again. Not out loud, not for her to hear, just to feel the shape of it in the dark. Naya. But peace in the West never lasts long. The next morning, Hank rode back from town with eyes full of worry. "Folks been talking," he said, dismounting. "Said you got yourself an Apache woman working here." Elias kept his voice even. "Ain't anyone's business who helps me." Hank spat dust. "You know how this'll look. People round here don't forget the raids. They see her here, they'll think you turned." Elias said nothing. Naya stood a few yards away, silent but her back straight, her chin high. When Hank left, grumbling, Elias turned to her. "You don't owe me this trouble." She looked him dead in the eye. "You didn't owe me your barn, yet you still thank me." The simplicity of it hit him hard. He realized then she didn't measure worth in gold or land or names, only in kindness. That night, as they sat near the fire, the stars stretching wide above them, Elias found the courage to speak what had been growing between them like quiet roots. "Maybe the land ain't cursed after all," he said, half smiling. Naya looked toward the mountains. The land was never cursed. It was only lonely. He nodded slowly, the truth of it sinking deep. They sat in silence then, the kind that isn't empty, but full of everything that doesn't need saying. The fire cracked softly, the horses sighed, and the wind carried the scent of rain. For the first time in years, Elias felt the desert breathe again. And in that breath, he realized he was beginning to breathe too. The night closed around them gentle as a blanket. Somewhere in the distance, thunder murmured, a promise of coming change. And under that endless sky, the man who had lost everything and the woman who had saved him sat side by side. Two quiet souls learning that sometimes saving the land means saving each other. It began with whispers. That's how all storms start. Not with thunder, but with talk that rolls from one porch to the next, one saloon to another. By the time the wind carries it back home, the words are sharp enough to draw blood. By mid-July, the town of Dry Creek had turned its eyes toward the Turner Ranch. They said Elias had gone mad, that he'd traded his wife's memory for the company of a woman from the very tribe folks blamed for the raids years back. Elias didn't care much for gossip. He'd buried too many good souls to worry about tongues. But this talk came with hate, the kind that crept under doors and poison wells. Old Hank returned from town one afternoon, his face pale and drawn. "Clint Reeves was holding court at the saloon," he said quietly, "talking loud about how you're letting an Apache woman sleep under your roof. Says the sheriff ought to come out and set things straight." Elias leaned against the post, jaw tight. "Clint's been waiting years for a reason to burn this place down. Ain't surprised." Hank scratched his beard. "He's jealous, is what he is. You married Mary, the one he wanted. Never forgave you for it. Now he's looking to drag your name through mud." Elias's eyes narrowed toward the horizon. "Let him talk. The land knows the truth, even if men don't." Still, that night, he sat longer than usual by the fire, staring into the flames. Naya sat nearby, mending an old bridle, her movements calm and steady. "Folks in town," he said finally, voice low, "they ain't talking kindly to you being here." She didn't look up. "I know. You ain't afraid?" Her hands paused only for a moment. "Fear feeds those who spread it. I will not feed them." He wanted to tell her to hide, to leave until the noise passed, but when he looked at her, the quiet steel in her eyes, he couldn't. She'd lived her whole life, standing where others told her not to. "You shouldn't have to fight my battles," he said softly. She looked up then, the firelight dancing in her eyes. "I do not fight for you, Elias. I fight for what is right." Her words landed deep, heavy and simple like truth always is. The next few weeks carried tension like thunderclouds. They worked the land together, heads down, hearts cautious. When he rode to town for supplies, men watched from the saloon porch, hats low, murmuring. He could feel their eyes like rifle barrels on his back. He didn't tell Naya what he heard, the laughter, the names. She already knew. One evening, as the sky bruised purple He came home to find her standing at the edge of the corral, staring into the distance. "They will come," she said quietly. He stopped beside her. "Who?" "The ones who fear what they do not understand." The wind picked up then, dry and warm, carrying the smell of coming rain. He looked at her, really looked, and something in him broke open. All his life, he'd been told strength was a man's burden to bear alone. But watching her, calm, unwavering, after all she'd survived, he understood that strength could also be grace. That night, a storm rolled in from the south, the kind that makes the desert sing. Rain lashed against the roof, thunder cracked, the heavens open. Elias stood on the porch, letting the cool drops soak through his shirt. He'd forgotten what rain felt like, how alive it made everything seem. Behind him, Naya appeared, her hair loose, dark against the lightning flashes. "The land breathes again," she said softly. He turned to her, his heart heavy with something he couldn't name. "Feels like it's thanking you." Her eyes met his, and for the first time, neither looked away. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, silence grew heavy between them. Not the silence of fear, but of something waiting to be spoken. He stepped closer, then stopped. "I don't know what this is," he murmured, "but it feels like I've known you longer than I've known myself." Naya's voice was barely a whisper. "Then maybe you are finally meeting who you are." By dawn, the rain had washed the land clean, and trouble came riding with the sunrise. Clint Reeves and 3 of his men galloped into the yard, rifles slung and anger burning bright. Elias stepped out before they could dismount. "Morning, Clint," he said evenly. Clint sneered. "Ain't no good morning when decent men got to watch filth crawl over what's left of this valley." Elias's jaw tightened. "Watch your mouth." "Or what? You'll shoot me to protect her?" He pointed toward Naya, who stood behind Elias, calm and unmoving. "She ain't got no place here, Turner. You know what her kind done." Elias's hand hovered near his gun, but didn't move. "You got no right coming here." Clint spat into the dust. "Town's got every right to keep its land clean. I'm giving you one chance. Send her back where she came from." Naya stepped forward before Elias could answer. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the air like a blade. "This land belonged to my people before any of you came. I will not leave." Clint's face twisted. "You hear that, Turner? She talks like she owns it. You really gonna stand by and let her shame your wife's memory?" Elias's breath came slow. "You don't get to speak her name." Then the world cracked open. Clint raised his rifle, too fast, too loud, and before thought could catch, Naya moved. She loosed an arrow from the small bow she kept slung near the barn, a clean, practiced motion. The shaft struck the rifle from Clint's hands. Chaos erupted. The men fired. The horses screamed. The storm that had barely passed seemed to return all at once. Elias dove for cover, returning fire only to drive them off, not to kill. The ground shook with thunder and fear. When the dust settled, Clint's men were gone, dragging him, wounded, away into the desert. Elias dropped the rifle, chest heaving. He turned to Naya. She was still, eyes wide, breath steady. Blood traced a small cut across her arm, where a bullet had grazed her. He moved toward her fast, grabbing her wrist. "You're hurt." She shook her head. "It is nothing. It's something to me." He led her inside, bandaging the wound with trembling hands. She watched him silent. When he finally looked up, her eyes were wet, though she didn't cry. "I should have left before this," she said softly. No, his voice broke. "No, don't say that. You are in danger because of me." He shook his head. "I was in danger long before you. Only now, I got a reason worth fighting for." The words hung between them, raw and real. She looked at him then, the firelight painting gold across her face. "You think this is debt?" she whispered. "That you owe me because I saved you?" He swallowed hard. "No, it's more than that." He took her hand, rough meeting soft, and said what had lived in him since the first night she dragged him from the fire. "You saved my ranch," he said quietly. "Now I owe you more than gold." The air stilled. Even the crickets seemed to listen. Naya's gaze softened. "Gold is heavy," she said. "Hearts are heavier. Do not carry what is already shared." He let out a breath, a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. In that moment, the storm outside faded. The world grew smaller. Just the two of them, the glow of the fire, and a silence that didn't need words. They spent the next day tending to what was left: broken fences, frightened horses, a cracked window. But under the wreckage, something had changed. He caught her humming again, the melody soft and full. When he asked what it meant, she said, "It is a song for new beginnings." He looked at her then, truly seeing her, not as the woman who'd saved him, not as the outsider the town feared, but as the only thing in his life that had ever felt alive and right. That night, as the moon rose silver over Turner's Hope, Elias stood outside the house, watching her shadow move through the lamplight inside. He thought about how far he'd fallen, and how somehow, in the falling, he'd found something worth holding on to again. The desert was quiet, almost reverent, as if it too understood that something sacred had taken root where only ashes used to be. And deep in his chest, Elias Turner finally knew. What she'd given him could never be repaid. Not with gold, not with land, not with all the years he had left. Only by living true. The days after the attack bled together like dust on a tired trail. The sky turned pale with heat, the earth cracked, and every night the coyotes sang louder, as if warning of what still waited beyond the ridge. I told myself the worst was over, but I knew better. Men like Clint Reeves didn't lick their wounds and go home. They healed with hate, and hate always came back hungry. One evening, Naya was tending to the horses when I found her staring toward the horizon. Her face was calm, but her eyes, they were listening. "They are near," she said quietly. My gut tightened. "You sure?" She nodded once. Vengeance moves loud. It does not know how to walk softly. I glanced toward the barn, where my rifle leaned by the door. "Then I guess we don't sleep tonight." She turned to me, her voice gentle but firm. "You do not have to meet darkness with darkness." Her words should have eased me, but they didn't, because I remembered Mary, my wife, her face the night she died in that raid, the same one Clint blamed on her people. I'd spent years telling myself forgiveness was weakness, but standing beside Naya, I wasn't sure anymore. Night came slow. The wind was restless, the kind that carries trouble before you can see it. I checked the rifle, loaded the chambers, then walked the fence line, the sound of boots over dry earth marking every heartbeat. When I came back to the porch, Naya stood waiting with a lantern. "Do not let fear guide your hands," she said softly. I looked at her, strong, unflinching. "Fears kept me alive this long." She stepped closer, her voice a whisper now. "Then let something else keep you alive tonight." The attack came just before dawn. 3 riders, shadows against a bleeding sky. Clint led them, his arm bound from where Naya's arrow had struck. His eyes glowed with madness, the kind that only festers in the absence of love. He shouted before he fired. "You think you can hide behind her, Turner? You think that squaw's worth your life?" The gunfire ripped through the morning stillness. I pushed Naya toward the barn, shouting, "Get down," as bullets tore through the porch rail. Smoke, dust, and fury, the air turned thick with it. I fired back, aiming low to drive them off, but Clint kept coming. He dismounted, stumbling forward with his shotgun raised, screaming words I'll never repeat. And then silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that comes when death takes a deep breath before striking. Clint raised his gun. Naya moved before I could blink, the same way she had before, fast and sure. But this time he was faster. The shot echoed across the valley. She fell. The world shrank to a sound, a low, broken thing I didn't realize came from me. I ran to her, catching her before she hit the ground. Her eyes found mine, steady even as blood darkened her side. "Stay with me," I whispered, pressing my hand to the wound. "Don't you dare." Her fingers brushed my face. "Do not let hate take you." I turned then, rage boiling through me. Clint stood there, laughing, hollow, half-drunk on fury. "You see what happens, Turner?" he spat. "You protect them, and they die for nothing." My rifle was at my side. I lifted it without thinking. For years, I dreamed of this. Vengeance, clean and righteous. But now, with Naya bleeding in my arms, it felt like the ugliest thing I could hold. She looked up at me again, her voice faint but firm. Do not give him what he came for. The words struck deep. Clint saw my hesitation and sneered. You ain't got the stomach for justice. I leveled the rifle, but not at his heart. I fired once into the dirt by his boots. The dust exploded around him. Get off my land, I said, my voice shaking with fury and grief. And when you ride away, remember this. I spared you because she asked me to. He stared at me like a man, seeing something he didn't understand. Then he turned, stumbled back to his horse, and rode into the burning dawn. I held Naya until the sun crept over the ridge, painting the world gold again. Her breath was shallow, but she was still there. Don't talk, I murmured, save your strength. She smiled faintly. You listened. I should have sooner. Her hand gripped mine weakly. The land remembers kindness longer than vengeance. You will see. Then her eyes fluttered closed. For a moment, I thought she was gone. But when I pressed my ear to her chest, I heard it, faint but there, her heart stubborn as ever. I carried her inside and tended the wound as best I could. Old Hank came by noon, jaw slack at the sight of the damage. Lord Almighty, he muttered. What in hell happened? Clint came back, I said, my voice rough. Naya stopped him. He looked at her lying pale and still, then at me. You sure she's going to make it? She will, I said. She has to. The days that followed were slow and heavy. I sat by her side, changing the bandages, whispering to her though she couldn't answer. Sometimes, when the wind was soft, I thought I heard her humming, the same melody she'd sung before. The town heard about what happened soon enough. Some said I'd gone soft. Others said maybe the Turner Ranch wasn't cursed after all. But no one came to finish what Clint started. Fear, it turns out, runs both ways. Weeks passed before she opened her eyes again. When she did, the first thing she asked wasn't about her wound. It was about the horses. They're fine, I said, laughing through tears I didn't bother to hide. She smiled faintly. Then the land forgives you. I shook my head. I don't think I deserve that. She looked at me for a long time before saying, Forgiveness is not earned, Elias. It is accepted. Her words sank deep, like rain finding roots in cracked soil. When she was strong enough to walk again, we rode out to the far ridge, the place where the land dips low and the wind carries the smell of sage and thunder. From there, you could see the whole valley, what was left of it, and what might still grow. I used to think this place was cursed, I said. Now I think maybe it was just waiting for you. She looked out at the land, her expression unreadable. It was waiting for peace. You gave it that. We sat in silence a while, the horses shifting beneath us. Then she said softly, What'll you do now? I thought about it. About the ranch, the graves, the empty spaces that weren't empty anymore. Live, I said finally. And remember. She nodded once, satisfied. That is enough. The years since have been kind in their own hard way. The ranch grew again, not as big as before, but strong. The land healed where the bullets once fell. Naya stayed. Some nights, she still sang by the fire, and when the wind caught her voice, it carried across the valley like a prayer for anyone still listening. We never married. She said hearts don't need vows when they already belong. But when people spoke my name, they spoke hers beside it, and that was enough. Sometimes I still wake before dawn, hearing echoes of that gunshot, seeing her fall. But then I hear her voice, steady, clear, reminding me that love isn't the opposite of pain. It's what survives it. And when I walk the land now, I swear I can feel her words under my boots, in every blade of grass and drop of rain. The land remembers kindness longer than vengeance. I believe it does, because here, in this quiet valley where ghosts used to roam, the wind doesn't sound like sorrow anymore. It sounds like peace. And peace, I've learned, is the rarest gold of all.